Good evening, sir. Mathur, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, I cannot see you.
I think you have blocked my video, is it?
No, sir. I will make you co-host, sir. Can you open your camera, sir? Yes. Yes, sir.
Now,
Good evening, sir.
good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone.
Sir, how was your reaction to the paper, sir? Ethics paper? Good evening, friends. We will begin the session in few minutes.
Mostly I was happy for you. You go.
Okay.
You are you're bang on this thing about group B, part B. Others have to say. I don't have to say anything.
See, aspirants, one thing I would like to tell that this year at least 2 case studies Mathu sir had discussed in his sessions, and I hope that people who have attended those sessions, and one of that case study even we had discussed, and then we had came to that conclusion on the honest officer who is being framed by some local goon. We had framed on similar lines, and we had discussed because of some recent happenings, and we thought that this case study Pakka UPSC is going to frame a question, and that was reflected in the exam. We were very pleased to see this in Mathu sir. Would have been very happy to see that case study directly coming in the exam. So what we will do, sir, is that we'll just go through the question paper, sir, if you permit me.
Now we can hear. Now we can see.
Okay. Yeah. So as usual, there were 2 sections. Section A, which is basically more to do with theory, and section B, case studies. So, sir, we will go through the questions like serial wise, chronologically, with your permission, sir.
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay. So, aspirants, the first question. Okay, the first question. If let me just go read the first question to you. Identify 5 ethical traits. 5 ethical traits on which one can plot the performance of civil servant, justify inclusion in the matrix. So what they are basically asking is to identify 5 ethical traits. So what you can do is directly what you can just follow the code of ethics, which is basically mentioned by the second ARC. That is the best place. You can just use that code of ethics. Second ARC has recommended that at present we have only code of conduct. So in place of just code of conduct, what we should have a code of values and code of ethics, and then code of conduct, because code of conduct is very narrow and it does not motivate the civil servant to take the ethical decisions. It just prevents the civil servants to do unethical things. Code of conduct is very narrow. So second ARC has recommended that let us have 3 things. Let us have 3 things: code of values, code of conduct, code of ethics, and then code of conduct, COC, code of conduct. So if you have read this code of ethics, you can directly answer. It is basically you can have impartiality, you can have non-partisanship, you can have all the 7 objectivity. Okay, you can have these kinds of efficiency is one of that ethical traits. So I think ARC has mentioned 7 or 8 code of ethics. You can pick 5 of them and you can justify them why these ethical traits are essential in a civil servant. For every ethical trait, you can justify by giving one statement, 1 or 2 statements.
We did this last year.
Yes, sir. Last year we had discussed this last year. And sir, the second question is similar. That's why they have added both questions together, sir. Second question says identify 10 ethical values that are needed to be an effective civil servant, directly copied from second ARC code of values. Second ARC has come out with code of ethics and code of values. So both of the questions are coming from the same paragraph. If I can just show you second ARC, okay, I think it is not visible, but second ARC report directly they have taken from the ARC has recommended public service code and public service code of values. And I think these two questions directly have come from if you have read the second ARC, the recommendations of second ARC, this is code of ethics, and this is basically code of values. So this was very straightforward and nothing much to discuss here. If you know these values, you can just write one line on each values. Identify 7 values, describe ways and means to prevent non-ethical behavior by public servant. Okay, non-ethical behavior, how to prevent non-ethical behavior. So second ARC says that there are 2 ways. One is what? Punish by basically having what? Preventive method and punitive method. By preventive method, we have to motivate them, we have to go for ethical training, that is preventive. And punitive is basically once if they deterrent effect, to have a deterrent effect. So there are 2 ways in which we can prevent non-ethical behavior in public servants. So these 2 questions directly straightforward. If you have read good standard material, which I have always advocated that please read standards, resources such as second ARC report, which government has brought out on ethics in public service.
This also, Santosh, this also, I mean, if you have read the conduct rules, then you will know how to punish also.
Yes, sir. So this was very easy question. First question was very easy, straightforward. Question 2 says, sir, impact of digital technology as reliable source of input for rational decision making is a debatable issue. Very good question. Critically evaluate the statement with suitable examples. See, these days we are talking of artificial intelligence. These where we are talking about MIS, Management Information System. So even to take decisions now, even in civil service, they are using lot of data, lot of computing. So question says that impact of digital technology as a reliable source of rational decision making is debatable. So how far these data will help civil servants to take rational decision is a debatable issue. You have to question that. So actually what you have to write is that, see, rational decision making also involves values, and might be sometimes this data might be devoid of these values. Okay, data, because data are value neutral, and any decision making in civil services has to include this value part, which will be missing in the data. And sometimes data can be biased data also. In artificial intelligence, sometimes the data can be biased data, or someone who has programmed that decision making matrix can be a biased programmer.
Yes, for example, algorithms can decide how the data is projected.
Yes, sir.
The same data can be projected in different ways.
Yes, sir.
And some will be misleading and some will be accurate. So you have to be intelligent enough to find out which one is misleading and which one is correct.
Yes.
For example, Facebook these days uses a large amount of algorithms in order to
yes, sir,
to project the posts which are posted on Facebook, and they keep changing those algorithms. So yes, maybe a post which you have posted will get to 10 people, some post will get to 25 people, like that. They same for data.
Yes, sir. So larger point, I think, sir, is that even this digital technology, although they can bring you a lot of data, but they cannot bring you values. Am I correct?
I agree that the value, first of all, there is a value of the data itself, and second is the value that you will put into when you use it. So there is a twin objective of value here.
Human values, and sir has made one larger point that the algorithms, because this data are processed by these algorithms. So who has made that algorithm? Is he having some biases? Because many times algorithm might be, even in America, sir, there are some softwares and some like artificial intelligence, like for crime detections. So they are biased towards blacks.
Yes, they are biased towards blacks.
So these using this technology, sometimes what happens that they might be biased towards poor people or some religion or some caste. So as a civil servant, we have to bring the value system, non-partisanship, neutrality, all those values. So these values might not be reflected in this data processing. Okay. And sir, one more, sir, we can say, sir, like in Aadhaar, the controversy with Aadhaar is that sometimes what is happening that people are not able to get their ration because they are not able to use their fingerprints. And sometimes they are devoid of getting their ration. So now the government has come out with a rule that even if you are not able to validate your this identity, then also rations cannot be denied.
Yes, because old people, their lines get blurred.
Yes,
so their fingerprints doesn't come very easily. It happens with me also these days. When I go for a new SIM card or something, it takes a long time for the machine to read my thumb. So I have to use some other finger to make sure that it is correctly there.
Yes.
So there are the various issues concerning this use of Aadhaar card and denial because of Aadhaar card. That's why government has said, irrespective of the Aadhaar card impression, I mean your thumbnail impressions, Aadhaar card itself is sufficient for you to gather the your rations or whatever it is.
So basically, sir, aspirants, what you have to write is technology plus values, both must be there. Simply technology cannot help you in taking rational decisions. This is this thing. Next question says that beside domain knowledge, a public official needs to be innovative and creative of a higher order as well, while resolving ethical dilemmas. Discuss with suitable examples. See, COVID example is a beautiful example where various civil servants, particularly the district collectors, have come out with various innovative and creative ideas to manage this big crisis which the country has faced. And a lot of examples are there where civil servants have innovated and have shown their creativity and innovativeness in solving the problems. Sir, can you?
Yes.
Sir, would you like to elaborate?
They have to actually job profiling, family profiling, village profiling. These are all innovative methods to reach the right people. So we do a lot of in service. We do a lot of profiling. For example, at airports and customs, when air passengers come, as soon as their manifest is made available to the customs officers, they have already profiled before the passengers reach the customs area. They have already profiled them, and many smugglers were caught only because of profiling. So job profiling and character profiling are very important.
Yes, sir. Sir, here the question is a little bit different. Question is saying, sir, apart from domain knowledge, a civil servant needs domain knowledge, but apart from domain knowledge, they need creativity also. The question is saying creativity and innovativeness.
So job profiling was a creative idea which was created by us.
Okay. In that sense. Okay, great. So what sir is saying that in every civil service, okay, in any government department, civil servants, particularly at the leadership role, they come out with various innovative ideas. Like one of the ideas sir was talking about is job profiling, where they profile what kind of people are coming in for the custom clearances. Okay, that was an innovative idea. So even you can give examples from the newspapers what you are reading. Particularly, I think from the COVID example, you can give a lot of examples where various district collectors, they came out with various innovative and creative ideas. I think one of the district, they have made their own oxygen plant because oxygen shortage was there, and they made their own plan. Some districts, they made some app to trace the people who are positive. So there are various innovative ideas were coming up during that COVID crisis, and generally it is said that necessity is the mother of invention. So during that necessity period, a lot of inventions happened in that COVID crisis. So here you can give talk about those innovative incidents. Okay. Next, if we see, next question is a statement question, sir. Every work has to pass through hundreds of difficulties before succeeding. Those that persevere will see the light sooner or later. So it is a quote by Swami Vivekananda, very simple quote. quote is on perseverance. We all know that anyone who perseveres will see the light. Okay, the light of success. At the end, he will see the light of success. And particularly as a civil servant, okay, you have to have perseverance, because things will not be simple for you. Things will be very challenging for you. And many a times you will fail in the first attempt in doing things, and you have to persevere, and finally you will succeed. And vaccination is one of that way, one challenge. I will tell you, in many of the districts, people were hesitant to go for vaccination. And as a civil servant, you have to persuade the people to go for vaccination. So that is a challenge. For vaccination is a big challenge. People are having a hesitancy. So we, as a civil servant, you cannot give up. That okay, once I have tried to persuade them, but people are not agreeing and people are not getting vaccinated. So like that, there will be an n number of challenges where you might not succeed in the first attempt. You might not succeed in the second attempt. You have to keep on trying. I think sir can quote any of his incidents from his work experience, like where things did not work in the first chance, but they had to continue, persist.
No, that happens in almost every walk of life in civil service. Nothing comes to you easily. And you have to keep on trying an idea. For example, when I was part of the opium cultivation, it was well known that cultivators secret away part of the produce and don't give their latex to everything to the government. And therefore, the first idea was to prevent and to have parties to prevent. But how many to prevent? There are thousands of cultivators. So what we did was to test and they mixed things with the opium to make to give a higher weightage. So what we did was to bring out machines which will certify that this is class 1 opium or class 2 opium and class 3 opium. And since these machines have come into play, the process has been speeded up, and the amount of opium being deposited by the cultivators or rather being evaded by the cultivators has shrunk to at least I would say 90-95%. And we started this operations when I was part of the narcotics department, and later on it has been now finalized. When I was in part of the opium cultivation, the average yield was 43 kgs per hectare. Today it has gone up to 66 kgs per hectare, all because of the machinery to assess the quality of the opium. Now they can't, the cultivators can't fool around. So therefore they are tendering more and more to the government. And then we are selling it further and converting it into all kinds of medicines and all that, codeine and thebaine, etc., etc. So you have to innovate. That's the only way to do it. Otherwise you can't do it. Same thing for customs clearances also. We now, by the time you reach the customs hall, your baggage has already been scanned. And those baggages which are not in conformity with the scanning, they are marked X, and you can pick up those 4 or 5 people. Otherwise, earlier everyone had to open it. I don't know how many of you remember it. Maybe in your era this has not happened, but earlier era everyone had to open their bags, and it was a huge nuisance and harassment. But we had to innovate.
So this is like difficult. See, although perseverance, you can give a lot of examples, but try to keep your examples as close to your job profile, which is a civil service. You can take challenges of Naxalism and law and order challenges also. Many times you will not succeed in the very first attempt. Okay, you see this threat of Naxalism, particularly in the central India. Okay, so as a superintendent of police, okay, you might not succeed in curbing this problem in the very first attempt or second attempt. So you have to persevere. Okay, you have to persevere, because this is not a problem which has come up in 1 year or 2 years. It has taken decades to come up. So obviously it will take decades to solve that problem also. So we need perseverance. So that was the quote. Second quote is also very interesting, that we can never obtain peace in the outer world until and unless we obtain peace within ourselves. A Dalai Lama quote, very cliched one, that peace outside cannot be attained until we are peaceful inside or within. So I think this is a very simple, very straightforward quote. Okay, what is inside will only manifest outside. So this is, I don't think we have to, we should invest time in this quote. The next quote is that life doesn't make any sense without interdependence. We need each other, and the sooner we learn that, it is better for all. A super quote, particularly for a multi-diverse country like India, multi-religious, multi-ethnic country like India. We should learn interdependence. Okay, without interdependence, and we have ingrained this interdependence throughout centuries. And this quote is very relevant for India and Indians, that life does not make sense without interdependence. Whether you see as a family, the mother, father, both are interdependent. The family itself is interdependent on each other. Similarly, as a society, as a nation, as a whole world, okay, we as a world, we are interdependent on each other. The whole community, world community, we are interdependent or not. So this globalization also, we are a lot of interdependence is there. So in that context, this quote has been given. Sir would like to say something on interdependence.
The interdependence came from the First World War when League of Nations was established. It was then decided that we need to work together on international scale. And that was now finalized in the form of United Nations.
Yes.
And then since then, the world of internet has thrown open interdependence, and we are now talking to each other very easily and very without much difficulty. Earlier, it used to be a nuisance to talk on phone and all that. Now you can see each other, talk to each other, and get what you want and see what you are getting before. So, and trade is expanding on interdependence. Our relations with other countries are expanding because of interdependence. So the world today is a globalized village, as they say. We are all living together, and we all have to have okay, you import something and you export something. So I need this and you need this. So therefore the trade goes on. So interdependence is now part of life. It used to be part of family, but which has now become part of an entire international world altogether, besides the nations. So, I mean, within the nation also you are interdependent, but now all together more so in the international and globalized world.
So you can write this answer we are giving from individual interdependence to family interdependence to society interdependence to international interdependence. A lot of planes, you can write this answer at various planes, and you give one examples for each level. It's a very good answer you can write for this at various planes at an international level, as sir has rightly explained. On the political front, on the economic front, trade interdependence is there. Then on the social front, a lot of interdependence is there. Then on the family level and at the individual level, okay, we all are interdependent. Okay, and once we learn that we are interdependent, we will be in harmony. Generally, why there is a fight, why there is a conflict? We think that, okay, your interest and my interest is different, then only there is a conflict. If we learn or if we understand that we all are interdependent, we'll never fight, we'll never be in conflict. So you can connect to the larger value of interdependence on which this entire universe is being is established. Okay, in Hindu philosophy we talk about this, okay, that everyone is interconnected. In Vedanta we talk about that everyone is interconnected, everyone is a form of God. So that interdependence is really we are seeing now in day-to-day life we are seeing. Okay, so this is a very good question. Someone is saying that to write when 150 words, it's a big challenge. Yes, it's a big challenge, but you have to be very precise and you have to give a lot of examples. You don't have to elaborate a lot on one point. You have to write various dimensions and you have to give examples for each and everything. Okay, next question.
Only 150 words are allowed. The number of words allowed are very little.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So you can't spend too much time and too much, too many examples. One or two examples is enough.
Yes, yes. No need to elaborate much, but you write many dimensions and one example for each, as sir has rightly pointed out. that would do. Okay, next question is on attitude, a very probable question. We had discussed this in the session also. Attitude is an important component that goes as an input to the development of human being. How to build a suitable attitude for a public servant? I think this question, Mathur sir is the right person to explain. What is a suitable attitude for a civil servant?
No, civil servants are supposed to be serving the people. There is no other attitude. All other attitudes are wrong attitudes. Therefore, if you know that you are part of the public and you are a servant, you are a civil person and you are a servant. So the important word is civility and being a servant. So you have to be humble at all times. You have enormous powers. Enormous powers are given to you by the government via various acts and laws and rules and regulations. But the aim should not be we should act as a facilitator instead of being a
master
person who is obstructing. The British had the idea that we have to stop the Indians. All laws are made against the people. You have not brought your Aadhaar card, rejected. You have not brought your this paper, rejected. But now the trend has changed ever since the 90s, that we are facilitators, we are civil, and we are servants, and it is required that we are humble at all times, and we serve the people and listen to them. For example, in my office as commissioner and chief commissioner, my doors are open all the time. Anybody could walk in without a appointment. I needed no appointment. I wrote on that very loudly that no appointment is required. You just walk in and give me 5 minutes and I'll call you in. So that is how it has to be. But enormous powers. As Commissioner Customs, I had enormous powers, and I was in charge of entire Gujarat. So, but those powers are useless unless you use them for the welfare of the people. So therefore, there is only one set of rules which are required for civil servants, that they have to be civil at all times with everyone, and reject politely. If you can't do their work, reject politely and say, sorry, this can't be done. But if it can be done, then you should give them a chance to get it to rectify all the mistakes and do their work. So civility is required, and your attitude of a servant is required, which includes several aspects. You have to be executive. For example, at some places, you are not given powers, but you have to go beyond your powers and say, all right, I'll give you another 2 hours to rectify this. So therefore, we had to give chances. For example, SR was owing a lot of money to the government. So I told the SR people that I'm giving you 2 months to pay this. Although the rules didn't allow me, but I told them that I'll give you 2 months, because they were doing great service for the nation. They had set up an entire plant there in Jamnagar. So I said, I'll give you two months to pay this amount. And if you can't pay, then as far as I am concerned, my hands are tied. I will take action. If you can get some waiver from the top, then it's fine. Otherwise, I will take action and seize everything on it. And they realized that I had limitations of my powers. But within my powers, I gave them full freedom to do it. I did it even for ordinary people also. It's not that only SRIB did it. We did it for ordinary people also. So your attitude towards ordinary and the rich and the powerful has to be the same. It can't change because somebody has more money and somebody doesn't have money. It makes no difference to a civil servant, ideal civil servant.
So basically what sir is saying, that you should have a humble attitude. You should have a serving attitude towards the public. Particularly, you should have a very sympathetic attitude towards people from the lower strata, because as a civil servant, you will be serving people from the lower strata of the society. You should have a very sympathetic or empathetic attitude. Sympathetic might not be the very right word. Empathetic. You must be empathetic, compassionate towards them. And how to build that attitude is that, okay, through experience only you can build the attitude. Attitude can only be built through experience, through behavior. Okay, there is there are 2 ways.
No. We do it in training these days. 2 years, 2 months, 2 years training. This is taught now as a subject.
Training sense.
Behavior of a civil servant is taught in all academies. In all academies, it is part of the curriculum.
So a lot of training goes into when you join civil services on attitudinal part also. As a civil servant, you should have what kind of attitude, and particularly the sensitivity training goes goes a lot. So that I think that would suffice for this answer. Next question is, in case of crisis of conscience, does emotional intelligence help to overcome without compromising the ethical or moral stand that you are likely to follow? So this question is on crisis of conscience. Does emotional intelligence help you without compromising the ethical or moral stand that you likely to follow? So as a civil servant, you will face a lot of crisis of conscience where you will be it will be very difficult for you to decide what is right, what is wrong. So during that time, will emotional intelligence help you without compromising ethical and moral stand? Very good question, very interesting question. And sir, do you have some inputs on this question, sir? Crisis of conscience.
No, as a civil servant, you will always in a crisis of conscience, whether to do. If your boss tells you to do a wrong thing, should you do the wrong thing? If some businessman tells you, gives you money and says do the wrong thing, will you do the wrong thing? Those are the crisis situations. And bosses often tell you to do the wrong things. The rich businessmen and big industrialists tell you to do the wrong things. And that's where you have to stand up and show your character and say that my conscience doesn't allow me to do the wrong things, and I will do the wrong things irrespective of the consequences that I suffer. So therefore, crisis in civil service of your conscience is a continuous process, and you are hammered in by day in and day out by people who can influence your behavior to act outside the rules and the regulations. So therefore, it is for you to stand up and say, no, my values, my ethics says that I have to do the right thing, and lure of money or influence of the bosses will not allow me to do a wrong thing. I used to tell my bosses, sir, I will not do the wrong thing, I will do only the right. Of course, after some time, they stopped asking me to do anything wrong, but businessmen continue to do so. Rich industrialists continue to influence you and say, please do this as a favor to me and all that. And in return, of course, they'll give you whatever you ask for, but that is where you have to stand up and say, no, my conscience, my values, my ethics don't permit me to do this, and I will do always the right thing to do.
And sir, one more thing, linking emotional, let's see, whenever you have crisis of conscience, okay, there will be emotional turmoil. Okay, there will be emotional turmoil. Okay, so to manage those emotional turmoils, okay, emotional intelligence is very important. Okay, in that case, under that circumstances, when you are forced to do something which you do not do, so how to politely say no? Only an emotionally intelligent person can do that. Otherwise, you will be stressed and your response will be reactive. Rather than responding to those requests or demands, you will be reactive. So in that case, also emotional intelligence plays a very big role. That is why they have tried to link crisis of conscience to emotional intelligence. Because once you have emotional intelligence, you know how to respond rather than react. Otherwise, you will be always in reactive mode, and reactive mode is not good for a civil servant. Okay, so I think you can link there. You can link there without compromising your values or your moral values. You can still maintain that relationship and say no. That is why emotional intelligence comes into play. See, many times we are asked for help from our friends also. And sometimes we think that the help asked is unjustified help. But we want to maintain the relationship. So what? We have to politely say no. And that requires a lot of emotional intelligence. Sir, am I correct?
Bilkul, it requires more. You have to maintain your relations and also say no.
Yes.
But all the time you have to see that your duty comes first and your relations come number two. So there is an emotional issue involved in everything that you do, particularly when there's influence from, let us say, your father-in-law tells you to do.
Yeah, family.
Or your wife's brother tells you to do something. Then there's a lot of emotions will come into play. And that's where you have to be intelligent and say, no, it can't be done. Or it can be done in only this much and nothing more can be done. So, but you have to play it very clear, very adroitly, I would say. They're very cool, very cleverly you have to play the game. When we do the classes, we will take up these issues and tell you which are the examples, because often to get examples is sometimes it's very difficult, but when the classes are held, then it will be possible to do so.
So next question is on refugee crisis. I think this we have discussed last year, but this question came 1 year later. Okay, so many questions I am seeing which we discussed last year have come this year. Refugee crisis. See, as a nation, as a democratic open society, every nation should have this responsibility of giving refuge to people who are in need. But what we have seen in the last couple of years, a lot of refugee people from this Syria and the Middle Eastern countries, they have tried to go into Europe and all, and many a times they were shown closed doors. So in that context, this question has come. Refugees should not be turned back because there is a policy of non-refoulement. Non-refoulement, if I'm correct, if I'm pronouncing the word correctly, the policy of the United Nations policy is non-refoulement, that we will not refuse anyone who is taking refuge in the country, particularly a democratic country which says that okay, it protects human rights and stands for human rights. These, particularly those countries, European countries, they should not close their doors, but they are closing their doors.
Many European countries, because of the worldwide condemnation, they started putting quotas that we will accept 25,000 refugees from, let us say, Syria or Congo or some other places, Sudan. For example, when Sudan and South Sudan broke up, a lot of refugees came to America. And finally, America set up a quota. Germany has a quota of about 40,000 for Syrian refugees. Every country now has a quota, but there are still lakhs of people who are being persecuted in their countries and they have nowhere to go. Recently, there was a boat tragedy where people, overloaded boat, sank, and a lot of people were killed. They were all refugees. They were being turned away from country to country. They were not being accepted anywhere. So it's a huge problem. Persecution and refugee problem is a huge persecution.
And sir, someone has rightly pointed out the word is examine. Yes, you have to write the other dimension also. Many times there are security threats. Many times there is a resource scarcity also. Every country has limited resource. So they cannot keep on taking refugees because there will be competition for resources.
India took 10 lakh refugees when Bangladesh
was created. Yes, sir.
Created 10 lakh refugees we took.
And we had issues in Assam movement. If you see, it is a result of that, a lot of migration. Okay.
Yes.
So yes, this is an interesting question where with various ethical dimension. Next question: should impartial and non-partition be considered indispensable quality of a successful? Yes, this is the sine qua non for any public servant. Impartiality and non-partisanship is a sine qua non for every public servant. Okay, every public servant worth his salt has to be impartial and non-partisan. This is a primary value every public servant should have. Impartiality and non-partisan, discussed with illustrations. So you can write that impartiality, basically we are living in a multicultural society, multi-religious society, and anyone who comes to you, you have to serve everyone equally. You cannot discriminate between people who come to you on the basis of caste, creed, religion. You cannot do that, or economic status. As sir was rightly pointing out, that anyone as a income tax officer or as an income tax commissioner or a customs commissioner, you cannot differentiate people just on the basis of their status, economic status. And the second part is being non-partisan. Non-partisan, see, as a civil servant, particularly as a district magistrate or superintendent of police, there will be always conflicts in the society between two religions, and you have to sort it out, this conflict. So you might belong to one religion, but you have to be non-partisan. You cannot be party to one of them. You cannot appear to be a party to one of them. Okay, so you have to be non-partisan in a society where we have multi-dimensional, multi-cultural society. Sir, am I correct? Like, is this
You're right,
interpretation-
but we need some illustrations. That is the problem at the moment. I am not able to think of any example.
Sir,
of,
sir, in communal conflicts, many times district collectors, they go and they sort out this issue of communal
that
conflicts.
is that's a good example
So
or when
do-
there is scarcity of food,
Yes, sir.
etc. Then people will help those who are close to them rather than everyone concerned.
Yes, sir. So this
I
is
mean,
a
particularly in shortage all the time. So
Yes, sir.
therefore they had to bring in these permits, but permits were given on the basis of friendships, etc., etc.,
Yes, sir.
on different considerations altogether.
Next, sir, last question is integrity is a value that empowers human being. So obviously integrity is the highest value. Without integrity, no other value is of any use, because integrity is consistency. Integrity brings consistency in your behavior, consistency in your character, and all other values basically are relevant as far as you are having integrity. If you do not have integrity, others values are of no use. So that is what this question is about. Integrity is a value, empowers the human being. Yes, because he can only use other values when he is having integrity. Otherwise, he will not be in a position to use other values also. It's a very simple question. If you have clarity of concept, you can answer this. Now I will give the floor to Mathur sir on the case studies. The first case study I think we had discussed. I'll read out the first case study. The first case study was on a civil servant who is having a reputation of honesty, competence, integrity, dedication, and relentless pursuit of difficult and onerous job. Considering his profile, he was picked by his bosses to handle a challenging, sensitive assignment. He was posted in a tribal dominant district notorious for illegal mining, excavating sand from river belts and transporting through trucks and selling them in black market was rampant in that district. This illegal sand mafia was operating with the support of local functionaries and tribal musclemen, who in turn were bribing selected poor tribals and had kept the tribals under the fear and intimidation. Sunil, being a sharp and energetic officer, immediately grasped the ground realities and the modus operandi followed by the mafia through their devious and dubious mechanisms. On making the inquiry, he gathered some more information that some of his employees are in hand in glove with them and have developed close unholy nexus. Sunil initiated stringent action against the mafia and started conducting raids on their illegal operations of the movement of the truck. The mafia got rattled, as not many officers in the past have taken such strong actions against him. Some of the office employees who were allegedly close to the mafia informed them that the officer is determined to clean up the mafia's illegal mining operation in that district and may cause them irreparable damage. The mafia turned hostile and launched a counter-offensive. The tribal musclemen and mafia started threatening him with dire consequences. His family was threatened, stalked, and virtual surveillance was kept on his family. Then the matter became serious when a muscleman came to the office and threatened the officer to stop the raids. Identify the different options available to Sunil in attending to this situation. Critically evaluate each options listed by you. Which of the above option do you think is the most appropriate for Sunil to adopt and why?
This is a classic example of a government servant facing a problem of where mafia is ruling and he is being threatened. And therefore, he has to take action. He can't stop the action and he has to perform his duties. And he doesn't want to be, Sunil doesn't want to be hand in gloves with the mafia. And therefore, they are threatening him. So therefore, the first option available to him is to keep his bosses informed and tell them that this is happening fearlessly and this is the action he's taking. Secondly, he should approach the police and ask for protection for himself and for his families. And he should motivate his staff to stay away from the mafia influence and perform their duties along with him. So the entire office has to get together and perform these duties. And he has to take the help of police and senior officers in order to serve the people he is working for. And mafia is not the person she is working for. He is working for the people of the area, those who are in the area. Therefore, there is no other choice with him but to keep his bosses informed in writing as well as verbally, and he has to keep the police informed and seek their help. He has to maintain good relations with the police, and thirdly, he has to keep his staff motivated to work with him rather than work against him. These are some of the three things which I can think of straight away. And integrity, as we discussed earlier.
Also, sir, we can write that he can take stringent action against the staff who is basically helping the mafia.
So therefore, he should not only keep the staff on his side, but he should also take action against those who are linked up with the mafia. So these are the 3 or 4 actions which he should take immediately, and critically evaluate. Well, I mean, options have been given by you, and therefore he has no choice in these matters, in these 3-4 matters. So therefore he has to do them, and therefore you recommend that he should do them. And the most appropriate for Sunil will be to keep his bosses informed and seek help, assistance from them if they want more. If he wants more staff, then he should request them and say, give me more staff, more honest staff, and also transfer out some of those people who are in league with the mafia.
Yes, this is a very good.
I would recommend that.
So very good point made out by Sarsi. Practical points. Whenever you face such kind of situations, what you can do is you need help from higher ups. Okay, and you can transfer out those people who are hands in glove with the mafia. So it's a very good strategy. Even I think you must have seen these kinds of even in movies also they do like that. Okay, they transfer out those people to some other departments where they will not be able to help the mafia, or some irrelevant post. They will be transferred to some irrelevant post, and new people from outside district who are new to that district, they will be brought in. So
and
that
those who have integrity, people with integrity have to be brought in. So integrity, as we discussed earlier, is central to a government servant. That is the only quality that will help you.
So really well thought out way outs by sir. Next question is very similar question has come in UPSC. See, I have been talking about the templates. See, all the UPSC. Now we will see 2 case studies. UPSC has already asked similar case studies, and they have again asked the same case study. So this case study is on conflict of interest. You are the vice principal of a degree college in one of the middle class towns. Principal has recently retired and the management is looking for his replacement. There are also feelers that the management may promote you as the principal. In the meantime, during an annual examination, the flying squad which came to the university caught 2 students red-handed involved in unfair means. A senior lecturer was personally involved in helping those students. The senior lecturer also happens to close to the management. One of the students is son of a local politician who is responsible in getting the college affiliated to the present reputed university. The second student is son of a local businessman who has donated maximum funds for running the college. You immediately informed the management regarding the unfortunate incident. The management told you to resolve the matter with the flying squad at any cost. They further said that such incidents will tarnish the image of the college and also the relationship with the politician and the businessman. Further promotion to the principal post depends on your capability in resolving the issue with the flying squad. In the meantime, you were intimated by your administrative officers that certain members of the student union are protesting in the college to take action against these students and the teachers involved in the unfair means. So what will you do? A classic case of conflict of interest. I believe, sir, we have discussed this n number of times.
Yes, this case study has been discussed any number of times. There is pressure on you to act with integrity, and there is a conflict that people are pushing you into not taking action because of their linkages with influential people. But as a administrator, you may even have to sacrifice and your ambition to be the principal, but you have to take the correct action, and that is act in the best interest of the students. Actually, it's a college where students are coming to study, and you have to make sure that no one can cheat in order to get ahead of others. And therefore, it's a very tough decision to make. But as a person with integrity and executive action, you have to do all, you have to make sure that all students are treated fairly, and those who are cheating are caught and punished as per the law, whichever way it is. But it means you will have to suffer maybe a demotion, which means you may not get promotion as a principal, you may get transferred, and your family may be put at disadvantage, and all that will happen. But conflict of interest has to be resolved in favor of the students and the college, and not in favor of the mafia and the politicians. But every civil servant finds, this is an example from a college, but you will find this even in your civil service career, that every day somebody will say do the wrong thing, as I said earlier. And that is where integrity matters. Integrity is not something which is abstract. Integrity is something which is real and happens every day. And you as a civil servant will be under pressure to act contrary to the rules. And that's where your entire personality will come into play. That no, I will stand up for the right thing to do, and not succumb to the various lures being offered to me or various threats being given to me. So therefore, it is important to uphold the values which students are asking for, and it is your duty and your bounden responsibility to act accordingly. So you have to resolve the conflict of interest within yourself, and no one else can help you here. Only you can do it. You have already informed everybody, but the higher ups, instead of stopping the businessman and the mafia, and they are asking you to take your own decisions. So that is how I would look at it.
Sir, similar question has come in 2016, where there was a college, and in that college they were trying to recruit a professor, and you get a call. You are a part of that committee, recruitment.
Yeah,
committee.
we did that. We did
yes,
this
sir.
exercise.
Yes, sir. That's what I wanted to bring to your notice, sir. And you get a call from the secretary and that please recruit this boy, because the college is getting affiliated from, or getting the permission of affiliation from the secretary. So the same question was asked, and once you do that, the college affiliation will be done. Something sort of that, sir.
Correct. We did that exercise with
Yes,
one of
sir.
the batches. We did that exercise.
Yes.
With one
So
of the batches.
here we can see the importance of previous year questions. If you have done the previous year questions properly and you have understood the 7-8 types of case studies and you have practiced them, then these case studies are like a cakewalk for you inside the exam hall. Okay, the next case study is on basically, okay, again, sir, this case study also, sir, if you remember, we have done, it is a 2013 case study, that an elevated corridor is being constructed to reduce traffic congestion.
Yes, we did this with the road being built.
Yes, sir. Road being built, and there is you have gone on inspection and you have found out that some errors are there in that construction, and it might lead to a disaster. But the chief minister wants that road to be inaugurated before the election. Also, the contractor is a relative of a minister, and he wants him to finish the project as soon as possible. And you get a hint that you will be promoted. Again, the same conflict of interest. Promotion is there.
Same thing. It's the same thing. There is no difference in the two case studies at all. There is absolutely no difference. But we will do these case studies with you. You are the new batch, and we will do these case studies with you, so that and we will do them how to write the case study also. It's very important. Not only you know the conflict of interest, but how to write it also is very important. So I'll frame the UPSC answer for you for about 8-10 case studies, so that you are fully aware of how to analyze, which are the key words in it, which are the important points, and what is your role in that particular situation. Sir, so we will do these exercises, and we'll try to make you less scared of the ethics case studies which you will get in the exam. Sir, I'm sure this year's students must have done well. Yes, because these case studies we did with them.
These two case studies really show the importance of previous year questions. So as a part of this ethics case studies, we will be solving most of the important case studies of the previous 7 years. Sir has already brainstormed them in the previous sessions. Sir already brainstormed them, and sir has shared his views on them and a model answer also. And sir will be sharing with this again with you also. And those previous year case studies are very important. And with this directly coming again, such case studies word to word, I think previous case studies cannot be ignored. The last case study is on coronavirus, that you are an administrator of a hospital and the number of cases are increasing and people are coming every day to the hospital, okay, where they are coming for treatment. So the question says that you are an administrator of a hospital, a public hospital, at a time when coronavirus had attacked large number of people and patients were pouring into the hospital day in and day out. What are your justification for putting your clinical and non-clinical staff to attend the patients, knowing fully well that it is highly infectious disease and resources and infrastructures are limited? In if yours private hospital, whether your justification decision will remain the same? Very good question. Where private and public, okay, they are asking, do you differentiate between private and public? So as an administrator,
actually, if you had read yesterday's paper or day before yesterday's paper, the Indian Express, it said 750 doctors and nurses of private hospitals have positive. Suffered from the infection, are positive, having suffered the infection from the hospital itself by attending on the patients. So therefore, there is no choice left with you as an administrator or a doctor or a nurse or a compounder or an ambulance driver to do your duty. This is doing your duty over and above. I mean, you know examples of hundreds of doctors and nurses, etc. Didn't go home for several weeks and slept in the hospital itself to take care of the onslaught and the number of the influx of the people coming into your hospital. But you have example of Italy, etc., where the number became so large in 2020 that they said, "Okay, now we'll play as God. We will attend to those who need the younger people and allow the older people to die." And that happened. That happened in some of the European nations, particularly Italy and maybe Spain. This happened. But as a doctor and a nurse who's taken the Hippocratic oath, it is your responsibility to see that all patients receive your attention, either your or your colleagues or somebody else's, and they are treated properly. And as far as public and private is concerned, there is no differentiation between public and private. Hospital is a hospital, and responsibilities remain the same. You are there to attend to the patients, and therefore the decisions have to be similar. That you will attend to them, you will take care of them, you will, even if they are sleeping on the. It's not something which is new. Sleeping in the corridors, patients in the corridors. When I was in Ahmedabad in 1990, we had our first major rains, and hundreds of children were in the corridors. I went and saw, went and met one of my employees whose child was suffering from, I think it was cholera at that time, and he was in the corridor, and those children were being attended in the corridor itself and were lying on simple sheets. Only there were no even gaddas available to them, and they were simply on sheets. They were lying there. Eventually, that man lost his daughter, and it was a very sad affair. But thousands and thousands of people were there. I was very lucky because I was in the service, so they took me through a separate route, and I reached that man. But there were hundreds and thousands of people there, and it was a government hospital. It was a government hospital, but he was being attended. The child was being attended to. So therefore, clinical and non-clinical staff has to attend fully well that they are infectious disease and resources, and there is an infrastructure is limited, and there is no difference between private and a government hospital.
So, sir has rightly explained there is a trap here that private and public, see, a doctor is a doctor, whether he is a public doctor or a private doctor, both have taken the Hippocratic oath to save any patient who come to him. So, and we have seen a lot of private doctors throughout India and a lot of private hospitals throughout India have done a great service to this nation during the Corona pandemic. So it's a good question. And we have last question is on like a reputed food company. I think this reputed food company, which basically supplies food to the international market and exports. So the company
this is on Maggi.
Maggi, yes sir, Maggi.
This is built on Maggi. Actually.
Maggi, yes sir.
This is an example from the Maggi actually episode. What action you would take? Actually, in the case of Maggi, the Indian that food authority acted without proper tests being conducted and all that, and their sampling was also wrong. They picked up the samples from the market without anyone else being present there and all that. So, but this is the example of the Maggi episode actually. What action would you visualize for the competent authority against the food company? Well, I can tell you this, that Nestle company lost almost more than 30% of its share value because of the simple action taken by an inspector to seize Maggi products in some city in Uttar Pradesh. I think it was Gorakhpur. He did that. What course of action will be available? The food company tried its level best to Barabanki. Somebody tells me it was Barabanki. Okay, maybe Barabanki. So the food company tried its best to resolve the crisis, but eventually they won the court case, and their reputation came back, and now their share has gone up. And although nothing was found against them, that is the sad part of the whole exercise. So nothing found about it. So integrity of the officer mattered, and I think he did not, that inspector who seized the Maggi noodles did not have the integrity to really, he was wanting to hurt the company, and he hurt them very badly. It must be said. Examine the ethical dilemma involved in this case. There's a huge ethical dilemma what to do, whether they should act against a food company or not. But eventually they did. And we'll discuss this case when we take the case studies with you. We'll mark out this case for you and keep it ready and discuss. The first case study will be on this only, on food company. And most of us are familiar with the Maggi case. So therefore, it will be easy to examine and easy to discuss. So that's what we will do when we begin our classes, our ethics classes.
Okay, so this will be the first case study sir will deal. And the last question, I think this is a question which sir might have like a lot of experience. Pawan working in an officer in a state government for last 10 years, and his boss is he's not having a good relationship with the boss, which is basically impacting his family life. So I'll read out the case, sir. I'll read out.
Let me understand.
Pawan working as an officer in the state government for the last 10 years. As a part of a routine transfer, he was posted to another department. He joined in a new office along with 5 other colleagues. The head of the office was a senior officer conversant with the functioning of the office. As a part of the general inquiry, Pawan gathered that his senior officer carries a reputation of being difficult and insensitive person, having his own disturbed family life. Initially, all seems to be going well. However, after some time, Pawan felt that the senior officer was belittling him at times unreasonable. Whatever suggestions given on or views expressed by Pawan in the meeting were summarily rejected, and senior officer would express displeasure in the presence of others. It became a pattern of boss styles of functioning to show him in bad light, his shortcomings, and humiliating publicly. It became apparent that though there are no serious work-related shortcomings, the senior officer was always on the pretext for the other and would scold and shout at him. The continuous harassment of the public criticism of Pawan resulted into loss of confidence, self-esteem, and equanimity. Pawan realized that his relation with his senior officer was becoming more toxic, and due to this, he felt perpetually tensed, anxious, and stressed. His mind was occupied with negativity and caused him mental torture, anguish, and agony. Eventually, it badly affected his personal and family life. He was no longer joyous, happy, and contented at home. Rather, without any reason, he would lose his temper with his wife and other family members. The family environment was no longer pleasant and congenial. His wife was always supportive to him, always became the victim of his negativity and hostile behavior. Due to harassment and humiliation suffering by the office, comfort and happiness virtually vanished from his life. Thus, it damaged him physical and mental health. What are the options available to Pawan to cope up with the situation? What approach Pawan should adopt from bringing peace, tranquility, and congenial environment in the office and home? As an outsider, what suggestions for both boss and subordinate to overcome this situation and for improving the work performance, mental and emotional hygiene? In our scenario, what type of training would you suggest for the officers at various levels in government department?
Well, I mean, this is a typical happening in a government office. I know several officers who were of this nature, and they just picked out people whom they were angry with, and they humiliated them and transferred them and slapped cases against them. And one of my colleagues has written a story about his father, how he was driven into poverty practically because the boss kept transferring him from place to place. And that was a political boss. And after some years, the fellow came back again to the same department and continued to harass him. And eventually, that man won all the court cases and all that. But by that time, his career was finished, and his children's education suffered. And that colleague of mine could not write the civil services exam. This is a normal theory happening in a government office, that bosses become obsessed with themselves. They start picking people for harassment and for humiliation. And therefore, what are the options available with Pawan to cope up with the situation is to meet his higher boss and seek a transfer. That is one way. Another way would be to take a leave of absence from the office for some time, so that his boss loses control, interest in him, and hope for the best. And he can lodge a complaint with for harassment. He can lodge these days. It is treated as an offense to treat your boss, to treat your subordinates badly. So you can lodge a complaint in human rights commission, and there are various other places. The women's law. If you are a woman, then you can go to the women's commission. So therefore, he has a few options to lodge a complaint, but unless he is transferred, the harassment will not stop. So what approach should he bring for peace? There is only one approach to him, and that is to take yoga and meditation, etc., etc. So for bringing peace at home at least, and his wife is supportive of him, so he shouldn't have too much problem. But mind is upset. And in office also, he should try to improve his work culture also. There might be a slight problem with the work culture also, so he could improve on that. But there's very little that he can do. But he can certainly go in for some kind of meditation, some kind of yoga, pranayam, etc., etc. Particularly for office environment, and he should seek a transfer. That is the first option. And leaving a service needs
difficult choice.
Very difficult task to do, because from where will he get the salary to run his life and his family? As an outsider, what are your suggestions for the boss? Of course, the boss should reform himself and look at the responsibility of the boss is to bring up develop the work culture and his capabilities as a worker. He should not be oppressive, but it should be supportive. And for himself, a subordinate, for Pawan himself, as I said, he should try to improve his work culture, to improve his output, etc., etc. And some people do that. Some people I know have started doing extra work. in order to impress the boss, and eventually the boss gave up. So therefore, you have to perform higher than what you have been doing. Let's say you can't say that it's 6 o'clock, I will go home. So what you do is you sit till 8 o'clock and do extra work. So all that is there, feedback mechanism, yes, but feedback is only to him only. The feedback, unless the boss's boss comes to know about it and intervenes. That should be done, and at least I did that whenever I came to know that somebody was being harassed, particularly because of the boss's attitude. What type of training you would suggest? Well, all kinds of trainings are given in, as I said earlier, in ethics and values and how to behave like a behavior, officer-like behavior, OLQs, what we call OLQs. They are given in various training colleges. In every service they are given. In every office they are given. At every level they are given. Even to for example, with customs, I gave training from IIM Ahmedabad to even our members of the board. They also came in for training on behavioral aspects of their behavior in office. So every training can be given at every level that is possible, and improving performance of that person himself is also very important. And if the boss's boss can influence his decision, then that is the best thing to happen. So as a bigger boss, as a higher boss, you have to be keep your ears and eyes open as to what is happening in your offices elsewhere. And Pawan's boss has to be brought to some kind of reprimand, etc., etc. That if you don't behave, I will transfer you and put an adverse remark in your ACR. And ACR threat is the biggest threat.
Yes, sir. Sir, if you permit me, I would like to say something, sir.
Yes.
Sir, in management, there is a theory called theory X of management and theory Y of management. Theory X, the superior always treats subordinate as like something, a person who does not like work, reprimands, punishment oriented. And theory Y says that, okay, the management should treat workers or the subordinates with developing them rather than just controlling them. Here, more of control is there, and here more of development is there. So that you can talk about management principles where how the basically bosses, they control or they.
No, this is true even in government also. We are told from day one that your responsibility is not to criticize but to bring up your employees. So yes, theory Y works. Yes, even in government, but theory X is what is displayed in public life. That is yes, the problem. The boss.
Sir, with this we come to conclusion. Sir, what suggestion would you give aspirants seeing this question, sir? People who are preparing for the next year, like what is your like perception of the paper and overall, like how should aspirants go forward, sir?
This is a simpler paper, and the case studies were also not very tough, but you require to read, as you mentioned, ARC reports and conduct rules, and to know how offices work. So therefore, newspapers are very important, and particularly Indian Express every and her story is very important. Story on this story today is on let's see, Express. No.
Is it, sir, the ONGC story?
ONGC story. ONGC story.
Yes, sir.
It is there. ONGC story is there. And one of the PMO's story was there a few weeks back, where he had done phenomenal work So those stories have to how the bureaucrats work and how they're civil servants. She's very important person to read every Sunday. So therefore, if you read the newspaper carefully, you will get the story, you will get the examples. And if your general perception of some of the books by civil servants are very important to be read. I will give you books which you should read on civil servants and how they have achieved. For example, if you read Natwar Singh's book, he was the Indian foreign minister, and he's written a very interesting book. It's in a very racy style, and that brings in a lot of. He almost acted like a civil servant, and therefore he brings in civil servants in different ways. So those books are very important to read. So if you have to have wide reading first of all, and you must read carefully. Every newspaper, whichever you read, whether it is Indian Express or Hindu, has to be read very, very carefully. And therefore, you have to be alert all the time of examples. And there are negative examples of a district magistrate misbehaving and all that. Those also are important.
Yes.
And good stories are also important.
And as a part of this, sir, this year I gave a lot of example list. Okay, so because I read newspaper, so we will also be making a list of examples and will be giving you. Obviously, your hard work, nothing will replace your hard work also, your reading, but we will supplement it through our list of examples also.
But read papers very carefully. You have to read Indian Express, but I read Indian Express, and I can tell you it's a very enlightening. Every day it's enlightenment to me. It's every day. Yes, Natwar Singh's book is important, and there are many other books which bureaucrats have written, and then you have to leave out what they are boasting, but read their actual achievements. Civil servants tend to boast a lot, so therefore you have to sift the chaff from the grain. And so you have to keep the grain in mind, not the chaff. So I think we have taken up enough time today.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So yeah, I hope that the session and the insights shared by Mathur sir must have really helped you all in basically analyzing the paper and chalking out a plan for the next year, because this was the analysis we came in order to help the future aspirants so that they can have the right strategy for the next year. I again thank Mathur sir for on a short notice he came for this session. Only in the evening I requested him, and on a short notice he came for this session. Thank you, sir, for that. And
you're welcome.
And I thank all aspirants also for attending this session. Thank you, everyone. Good night to everyone.
Good night, everyone. Good night.